I'd like to start our message this morning with one more Bible passage from the book of Acts. If you were a part of the Transforming for Missions weekend a couple of weeks ago, you may remember this passage from our time on Saturday when we were together in the workshop. If you weren't there, great, because I'm going to tell you all about it. So Acts chapter 17, starting at verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he's waiting for Silas and Timothy, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him, perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, to change the way they think. For he has set a day when he will judge the whole world with justice by the man he's appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead." And when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. As I reflect on that passage and as I think back on the weekend that we had with Transforming for Missions and the report that they came out with and all that amazing stuff, I'm reminded of a couple things. First, if you haven't read that report, it's a pretty thorough document that actually outsiders came in as consultants into our congregation and looked at us from the outside in and said, "These are some amazing strengths you guys have, and these are some challenges that we have as a congregation." One of the things they said we do amazingly at, probably better than most churches in our denomination, is attractional outreach. So we have like the block party. We have another one coming up in June, in less than a month, where people from the community come here and we give them hot dogs and hamburgers and have a blast with them, and they say, "That's awesome," at attractional outreach where people come to us. They said we do a great job of other things like the Easter egg hunt, where people come to us. Even our day school, our Christian school, people come to us. We do a great job of attractional outreach, but not as good of a job at actually getting out beyond our four walls and off of our campus and being incarnational, being Jesus in the flesh within our community. They said that's what a lot of churches struggle with, but it is also one of our struggles. So as I think about that, and I think about this passage in Acts, 3 things came to my mind. One of them was a map. One of them was a CD, and then a bottle of wine. So first, the map. There's a story about a group of friends. They went to a thrift shop, and they picked up an old map, like this one that I found at a thrift shop. It's got other people's scribbles on it and highlights and all that, but it's still a pretty good map, right? So these friends, they wanted to go on a camping trip, but not just any camping trip. They wanted to make it like a trek, like an adventure, where each day they were at a different location. And so they plotted out their route. They figured out the map, or from the map, they figured out the rivers and the streams and the lakes and the mountains. And they figured their route to the T, even where they'd be picked up on the 7th day, the exact location at the exact time that their friend could pick them up at that spot. So they used this thrift shop map to plot out that whole route. So what happened is they went on that trip, and they spent a long time planning it, but as they went out, they found that there was a couple things that weren't on that map. There wasn't any notification on that map that there would be black flies that would totally be biting at them, so they'd have to cover up like as much of their flesh as they could. The map didn't say anything about beaver dams either, where what they expected to be a really strong flowing river was just a trickle because beavers had set up shop there. And so they'd have to pull their canoe over top, trying not to damage the beaver dam, but needing to get over it. So on the last day, they've had a blast so far, but on the last day, they're paddling upstream. And the reward at the end of that day is supposed to be this crystal clear lake that's just smooth sailing to get to their final spot. So they work hard going upstream all day, and then they have the smooth sailing. That's the plan. But this strong river that they were supposed to paddle up current was more like a trickle, and they couldn't figure out why. Maybe there was a beaver dam up there. Maybe it was low rainfall. They didn't know. But they got to where the lake was on the map, and there was no lake there. It was a totally empty lake bed with no water whatsoever. I don't know if you've ever seen something like that. I did one time where a lake had totally just dried up. It wasn't there anymore. So what they found out was that their map used to be right, but their map wasn't right anymore. The terrain had changed, right? So when that map was made, it was good, and it was informative, and it was helpful. And it helped them for most of the journey, but then at the end of the journey, the map was kind of useless. So they needed to update their maps. Verse 16 in our passage talks about how Paul was distressed by all the idols. It basically means he was like provoked in his spirit by all of these idols. So he went out and he talked to all the people in the community. He talked to Jews and different philosophers in that community. He wanted to get a good idea of what the terrain was in Athens. There's this Greek compound word that it uses. It says, later on, Paul says that he looked carefully around their town. And it's this compound word called anatheorio. So ana, the first part, is this Greek prefix that gives kind of a upwardness or an intensity to a word. So it's like saying that something isn't just ordinary, but it's extraordinary. So it gives it that intensity. And then theorio means to know or to experience. So Paul says, I went around your city and I really got to know it on like an intense experiential level. I wasn't just a tourist here. I was looking around trying to be a local, trying to get to know it as best as I could. I wanted my map to be as updated as it possibly could. So that's maps. We need to make sure that our map, if we're going out into our community, that our map is up to date. Do we know the terrain? Because our community's changed, right? Just not just physically, but culture's changed over the past 5, 10, 20, 50 years. Are our maps up to date? Second thing is a CD. I had this ritual when I was a teenager. Whenever I got extra cash, whether it was from the paper route or from reffing a hockey game or from allowance or from my mom's purse, I would go buy a CD. And I had the same ritual when I would get home. I would go up to my room, I'd unpack very carefully the CD, I'd take off if there were any stickers, I'd pop it in the CD player, lay on my bed, I'd take out the jacket so I could read along with the lyrics, and I would listen to that CD on repeat, probably 2-3 times. And then I'd pick out my favorite song and put that song, one song on repeat, listen to that one song for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. I listened to it a lot. And then when I learned to play guitar, then I would go try to figure out what key it was in, what was the chord progression. I'd figure out what was that neat little lick that the guitarist was doing. I could go to the internet, find what the solo was, and pretend that I could play along with it. But as you'd expect, after I listened to it for hours and hours and hours, this one song, I'm sure everyone else in my house was sick of it long ago. But the same thing would always happen, that eventually I'd get so sick of that one song. And then initially I think I'd just get frustrated and say, oh, that was a waste of money for a couple of hours. But then I realized, you know what, there's actually like 15 songs on this thing. I could just listen to another one. So I'd pick another one and put it on repeat, maybe the next day, and listen to it over and over and figure out how to play it on guitar. I realized that this CD isn't just a one-trick pony, that it actually has a whole bunch of different tracks on it. So as Paul is in Athens, I should say before he was in Athens, chapter 17 at the start, Paul was in Thessalonica, and he was in a synagogue. And when he was in the Jewish synagogue, he told people that Jesus is the Messiah, he's the Christ. And the Jewish people get really happy about this because they know what that term means, and they're really excited about the idea of a Messiah coming to rescue them, right? They've been waiting for it for hundreds or thousands of years. So Paul, when he's in Thessalonica, knows that terrain. He knows what map he can use there, and he knows what message to preach there. But when he's in Athens, he doesn't really even mention Jesus at all. He preaches the gospel to them, but he never mentions Jesus. What he does instead is he takes that CD and he realizes, I've got a whole bunch of different tracks on here. I can pick a different one and sing them a different song. So as he goes around Athens and he looks at the city, he sees all these gods, all these idols and statues of gods. And then he says to them, I see that you guys are actually really religious. He doesn't blast them for following Oprah's Twitter or for reading a Deepak Chopra novel or something like that. He just says, I see you guys are searching for something. That's cool. The Greek word that Paul uses is really fun to say, so I'm going to say it. It's daisi dahi monasteros. I was going to get you to say that along with me, but it's probably too long. Daisi dahi monasteros. It's this Greek word that means dread of the deities. So when Paul says, I see that you're very religious, he's actually saying, I see that you guys are actually pretty afraid of these gods. You orient your lives in such a way to make sure that you're appeasing the gods whenever you can. And so the track from the CD that he picks is one of a God that doesn't need to be served. He says, as if anybody can bring him anything. He's not a God, Paul says, that wants an idol. He's not a God that resides in a temple or in a statue, but he's a God that cares for everything and gives everything purpose. So he doesn't mention Jesus, but he gets to their fear, their underlying fear there. I think it's really neat that the Bible never really nails down like one metaphor for what the gospel is. I don't know if you've ever noticed that before, but the gospel isn't just a simple equation of A plus B equals C. It's not just that I sinned and Jesus died and I'm forgiven. But the Bible tries to nail it down in a bunch of different metaphors than just that. So sometimes the Bible talks about the A plus B plus C thing, but other times it uses a different metaphor. Sometimes it uses a family metaphor. So sometimes the Bible says, the cross somehow made me more a son of God than ever before, and it made everyone here more a child of God than they were before. The Bible uses judicial terms. There was a law that needed to be fulfilled. So the cross can't just be summarized just in one neat little metaphor. It also talks about relational metaphors. So the reconciliation of all things. That there were broken relationships between people and another person, between man and God, between people in the environment and all that, and somehow through the cross, they were all brought back together, that relationships were made new. There's even economic ones where debts are forgiven, and victory metaphors where death is defeated. The Bible never nails down one particular song or metaphor for the gospel. It says there's a whole CD worth of songs that you can use here. So Paul just picks a different song based on his terrain. So he knows his map, and he knows which song on the CD to pick. So the gospel is really flexible and adaptable and pliable that way. I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way. It was kind of a new thing for me a little bit ago, where there's all these different tracks that we can pick. So that's maps and CDs. You're probably all wondering why there's a bottle of wine up front. It's half empty, and I didn't drink it this morning, I swear. Sometimes, or let me back up. I love wine. Was anybody here at my wedding? A few people? When you came to our wedding, and you went to the reception, yeah, you were there too. Yeah. When you came to our wedding, to the reception, you know how you get to a wedding and there's a big board there of which table you're supposed to go to and who you're sitting with, and you know how close to the head table you are and all that type of stuff. Sometimes those tables just have numbers assigned to them. If people are really creative, maybe they're car enthusiasts. So one table is like a Corvette table and a Mustang table or a Chevelle table. That's all the cars I know. Ours was wine varietals. So when you showed up and you saw, hey, I'm sitting at the Chardonnay table with Bob and Susie. And then you'd show up at your table, and your table would have a Chardonnay sign, and then it would give you a paragraph of what makes a Chardonnay so special, what makes it distinct from a Sauvignon Blanc. Or maybe you were at the Gamay Noir table, and that would tell you why it's a red, but it's still refreshing. So I love wine. My wife, she still had a chance to leave at that point, but she agreed to do that for me. That was very nice. I love the whole process of uncorking a bottle and then letting it breathe and then pouring it into the right glass and then noticing the notes on the bouquet. I don't know if I'm making any of you want a glass of wine. I apologize, but noticing, oh, that's got a really pipey note to it, or that has a little hint of crisp apple or something. So I love wine. You might call me an amateur wine connoisseur. I come by it naturally because I think my dad would try to be one as well. But I love wine. But when I'm thirsty, I just want a glass of water. So I love wine. I'm like a wine connoisseur, kind of. But when I'm thirsty, I want a glass of water. Sometimes we try to give people a gospel message that's maybe too next level stuff. It's a bit too complicated, a bit too much. They're thirsty people. They don't want wine. They just want a glass of water. So when I say that we give it too complicated, sometimes we tell people about substitutionary atonement, how Jesus paid the debt for their sins, when all they want to know is that Jesus loves them. They might just want to know that I love them, right? Sometimes when we talk to, or at least on Wednesday nights when kids come here from the community and they want to hear about this Jesus stuff a little bit, but they want to know that I love them first. And then they want me to intertwine a story of Jesus' forgiveness where I also forgave someone. They want to hear, if I'm talking about a gospel of reconciliation, well, where did I make a relationship right that had previously gone wrong? Sometimes we want to give them wine when they're just thirsty. And the thing about giving a thirsty person wine is that it actually makes them then more thirsty. It doesn't quench any thirst at all. It just makes things worse. So we need to be careful, especially I think as Lutherans, because we really pride ourselves on strong doctrine, right? And that's a positive thing, but we need to make sure that we don't just explain the second article of the Apostles' Creed, but that we tell them who Jesus is. So that's maps and CDs and wine. Sometimes it can be really daunting, I think, to think of all this, telling people about Jesus stuff and trying to wrap stories together of forgiveness. And it can be hard to go out into our community and try to live that out. At the end of our passage, it says that Paul failed partly. It says that some people, when he started talking about resurrection, they said, that's ridiculous. I'm done. I'm walking out of here. And so they did. They just walked out. So sometimes when we fumble over our words and we make it awkward and maybe we get embarrassed trying to talk about Jesus stuff, that's okay. Paul sometimes failed too. But other times, people stuck around and they said, I want to hear you again on this subject. So sometimes we're going to fail when we try to tell people about Jesus, but other times we get to see that little gleam in somebody's eye when we notice that little spark of something's going on there. They're connecting dots with this Jesus stuff. So sometimes we fail. Sometimes, though, we get to change somebody's world. So if you remember nothing else from this morning, remember these three things. Is our map up to date? Do we know our terrain? When we try to get out of this building and off this campus and into our community, do we know that our map is actually up to date? So do we understand the terrain, the culture around us? CDs. Do we know for ourselves, first of all, that the gospel is this multi-layered, flexible thing with a bunch of different tracks and songs on it? And do we know where we can sing which song to which people? And then wine. Are we giving thirsty people something that's just going to make it worse? Or are we giving them a glass of water, the water of Jesus Christ? So as we leave this place, may we learn to look at the terrain around us and recognize where we might be missing some lakes or where there might be some beaver dams and learn how to update those maps. As we learn to explore the flexibility and adaptability of the gospel of the cross of Christ, may we learn to, first of all, internalize that beautiful message for ourselves and then know which song to sing to different people. May we enjoy the wine of theological debate, but also learn to simply bring thirsty people the water of the cosmic Christ. And may all of us learn to live a lot more incarnationally for the cause and for the sake and the love of Jesus Christ. Amen.